aige, bhí cumann luachlas gael tréis tachtí gach bac a hasan a bhealach, agus a chlídiantaige tríd gachú láán a chastair na héireann chuige. Is mar jouler a gangal seo leis an stair, go bhfuil an cumann fitte fuite le pobl na héireann, agus a thugann ahantas faoi leho. Ach conas a dás, cumann luachlas gael, isteach an san agriocht amatéirich sport is mó daun.
Old men have forgotten the miseries of the famine and had their youth renewed by the sight and sounds that were evoked, by the thrilling music of the command, the well-directed stroke of the Coolboire, or the swift stride of the Gaelic forward in his pursuit of the ball to victory. Many dark days have dawned over our country. Sorrow and trouble have likewise made their way into the homes and hamlets of our people. It is certain that in some cases these clouds would have been darker and care would have eaten more deeply into the hearts of many had it not been for the pastime and pleasure created in the revival of the Irish Games by the Gaelic Athletic Association.
Éire sna 88. Bhí pobl na tuaithe scrista ón ngorta dahad bliain níos tuisce. Timppel na tíre, bhí grúpi begadíine ag spléach a hart, fiachant cen gnéthe don ahantas gaelach a dietfí a chéimhnú. Agus lauradar faoi sport. Lauradar faoi na sport eisicha éirnacha a chailfí leistig de chupla blian mar a dúgfaí a gaudara. Agus hosníidir a Hazes Hotel dúrlas an géadlád a bhí na sauna 88.
There are occasions when I close my eyes and I say to myself, what was the atmosphere like at that meeting? Did they know each other beforehand? We had two journalists, a stonemason, a solicitor, Davin and Cusick. But one thing is certain, when they set off on their separate ways, little did they realise what they had sown. They had sown seeds that caused an explosion, the impact of which is still being felt in Ireland today.
Ní raibh dolas ag cumann luachlas gael ach bheith ceangailtha go dlú leis an náisiúnachas, mar a géadal sios bunaíodh an cumann ins na 10 mbliana úr de bhí lánda náisiúnachas, Home Rule agus Tachan King Parnell, cogan an talún a tosnúgus mar sin de. Inis, bhí níos mó ná náisiúnachas ann dar nó, mar bhí cuspóirí láidir sóisialta ag an cumann luachlas gael cuma.
The GAA was very much a product of a cultural revival and a concern with cultural revival as well. You'll find an awful lot of overlap between membership of the Irish language movement generally and the GAA as well. So there was that sense of there being specific Irish impulses behind the establishment of the GAA. Ireland as a colony was reacting to a sense that they needed to recapture that lost past.
Agus bhí daoine chuir na ceiste ceir dé an náisiún seo a bhfuil saoirse folíochta á théalamh ar a hon. Agus ceir díad na saintréthe atá ag an náisiún san. Agus chuir sé sin daoine á gceistú héin faoi cad a bhí sanúil, cad a bhí dúchasach. Mar grám ag éireannig. Agus ar nó bhí cluichí, agus teanga, agus nósfirachtaí, agus béasa mar a deartha na béasa dúchas. Bhí sé sin go mór chun cín.
The principal point in my thinking anyhow was the focus on an independent Irish mind and a breaking away from the colonised mind. And that was never more prevalent, I think, than in those years. You had the breakdown of the famine, the immigration, the loss of the language, as was it was obvious in many ways, because the emphasis on sport and games was pretty prevalent in other countries that time.
It's also part of a wider international attention being devoted to what were regarded as lost pasts and the idea of national identity, and the idea in sporting terms of ball games becoming part of the social fabric that was common in not just in Europe but in Africa and Australia as well. And this is the Irish version of that.
If we continue travelling for the next score of years in the same direction that we have been going in for some time past, contemning the sports that were practiced by our forefathers, effacing our national features as though we were ashamed of them, and putting on with England's stuffs and broadcloths, her habits and such other effeminate follies as she may recommend, we had better at once and publicly abjure our nationality, clap hands for joy at the sight of the Union Jack, and place England's bloody red exultantly above the green.
As na clí fathe go léir bhí an agrú fud na Hórapa, bhí éireacht íringach ása ag an amáint. Bhí tuairiscí scríofa ag dul siar go dtíon 8 ís. Ba léir watha sa gur imríoga an amáint go forleathan, agus go raibh tríthe dríochtúla ag baint le.
Hamán ród siar go ceann bhanúd le 7 machas fiche le 1000 misnúin, chun dúthán amánaíocht a thuirt an líon céanna den túgad anna. Is ó mí buile dá lábhas dá gosa búilig, go dtí go raibh a gnáfa buiste brúite, is gur fágach sínte an móiníad, agus cuireadh deire leis an glethe.
Bhí sé níos dacra tachtar éireacht na pelle, ach ba léir gur chaamh aimsire forleathanna a measc na ngéil rúchasacha. Deirtar go raibh córic ann ar a dugtaí cad, agus go raibh sé a gultúr chorca ghaoine ón aimsir réamh cheilteach.
Bhí tradiisiún na caide go láidir a géirí, próistí an aige chéile. Agus có fadagus is féidir lumsa dhéanamh amach sórt rugby a bhí an áil. Ní bhí cúlaíocha, bé an nós ná go meach an búig péireann a thuaireach an fel a bhaile. Agus béidir gúil gaeilge sin leis an fel a thuairt thar an líne mar a bhí an don úd nó don trais an rugby. Ní a bhéon teóra leis an líon daoine bhíoch a gimmart, bhíoch sé anna gara bhar uiribh, agus tá dóthan cúnta sí achraí na háir le tréis na glethaí. Agus go múltaí a daoine agus béidir gur na sort faction fight agus radaí cosú le sin a bhíoch mar chríoch leis.
Bhí cá an náisiúnachas á readinis ar bhain únéireachta talún. Thug an cogadh seo fócas do glúiseacht a bheochanna i ngach cúnta próiste agus baile fearan. Bíad siúd a bhí a naig na díornaí talún agus aontas leis an mreatain a deagraigh imeachtaí sport.
I think the Land League might have opened it up somewhat as well. They had been quite successful, say 1879 to 82, and the power of the landlords were being broken. And there was the decline, I think, in deference to the landlord and in independence of mind. So that might have led on again then to Cusack and the rest saying we're going to have our own organisation that will be democratic and will run. There'll be no barriers, social barriers or anything else, and we'll have an organisation that will run sport for athletics and sport for Irish people, by Irish people.
Agus le cogan na talún thug sé misneach agus commas agur do Erimóirí agus do chláán na Verimóirí agus do Hiúpadóirí agus daoine gnámhaintear na túise agur a chur féin agus chorinnaig na thuasachma. Agus bín an dárad bhealach a tháinig le chéile le bunú chum an núcleas gail agus le beart cinúnach I hísóig. Sé sin rá gur chóirgamach an gnámhaintear muintear na túise go háide ba chóirgamach siad san na náam le gceannas ar a gcuid síimsíocht agus a gcuid cuasaí núcleas a héin. Agus mar chuiddó sin na cluichí dúchasacha a nóchain agus a orbert an amáint agus an féil. agus an uasar sin gur chóir gomach an gné ruchasach dar gáil túair a gaiiteanna I ggur sé síimsíochta, lúclas agus mar sin de a teachchain cín in áid sin a bheith mar rubbal le fashion, le nósfriachtaí agus le béas a hasanna. So ó hebh na héráide de bhí sé tráthúil a char nó ní thar loch sé marach císáig a dhéanamh bháilteacht an faoine bheith bhéige agus an commas a bhí ag a rudí a chuirt sa tiúil.
We tell the Irish people to take the management of their games into their own hands, to encourage and promote in every way every form of athletics which is peculiarly Irish, and to remove with one sweep everything foreign and iniquitous in the present system.
In a mask siúd bí níomhí an a bheochan na lúchlasíochta bhí míhall ó císóig, bunathair chum an lúchlas gael. Thuairling sé am rá clia, ach níor bhada go bhfuair sé amach nacht an gnáganne a bhí na cluichí, agus faoi 88 bhí plan bhfuil bhíonachaige.
The one Cusack probably has the biggest criticism of in terms of its class appropriation is athletics. He sees athletics as being much more a game for, broadly speaking, the kind of working labouring classes. But he sees that the way the Amateur Athletic Association has kind of taken over and controlled athletics in Ireland has produced something which is kind of, it's upper class, it's elitist. And for Cusack it goes with all kinds of problems as well. Gambling, racing for prizes, that kind of social performance, that kind of upper class spaces and places that he doesn't see as being a central value to sport.
Faoi 88 ceithir, bhí 8 níoracht tepe chun agriocht a bhunú a rialach sport an éiring. Bhí íirecht dinta ag gáil císog, agriocht a bhunú a gcorcaig, agus smaoinmhige ceann eile a bhunú a mbaile lach a riach. Bhí sé cinnte faoi rud amháin, ní a mbaile clia a bheirse. Áit a raibh na cluban na sport eile I géirí clárú le Lúndan.
Dear Sir, you are earnestly requested to attend a meeting which will be held at Thurles on the 1st of November to take steps for the formation of a Gaelic association for the preservation and cultivation of our national pastimes and for providing rational amusement for the Irish people during their leisure hours. The place of the meeting will be decided upon at the Commercial Hotel Thurles at 2 o'clock on the day of the meeting.
Chúig an císógach thóir duine a thuairteach stádas níos mód an agriocht. Bhí clú agus cáil bhuiir seo dá bhín fuaide domhan. Bhí craobh na héireann, craobh hasanna agus choiríocht an domhainige do chahabh an chasúr.
Bhí sé táchtach ag tús chum an lúclas gael. Go mbeadh lúclasathe cáiliúla, go raibh a gáil leata chana féin, le feiceáil a teachtasteach sa chumann agus a bheith bainteach leis. Agus bhí lúclasathe cáiliúla an bhód in éireann ins na 80idí. Bhíonn an rud beidir beluachmhara a thug davan. Bhí sé cáiliúil, bhí measa agus ómós ag lúclasathe agus ag lucht sport agus nuair a tháinig sé isteach sa chumann, agus nuair a bhronn sé an stábas sin a gcumann, ba bhóid an chairú sin don chumann ins na léhananta tosaí sin.
Bhí cumann lúchlas gael ag dulchan cín, ach bhí díomhála dhéanamh ag aragóintí in bheanacha agus laistigh de bhliain go le bheadh bunathair na hagraíochta I mithe ón Geanasíocht. Lúchlas gael, bhí sé a bhacair an chisógig ag scuabat siad na tíre like a prairie fire.
They staged these kind of spectacular events around the country at which huge numbers of people turned up, and from that they managed to establish a network of clubs which grew year after year to the point that by 1888 there were 1,200 clubs in the association.
Agus is fear go bhfuil stair an chumainn a talamh, agus mar a tháinig bora agus fás na cluichí dúchasacha agus an lúchlasíocht faoi chuimirce an GAA, gur bhaigh sé neart anna lua, fiú agus an folítíocht, anna chasta agus anna ghrána go minic ag leibhéal na gaiistí agus na hardcóirde.
I think there's a tendency to exaggerate the speed with which the GAA was established. I mean, Michael Cusack did talk about it sweeping across the country. It was never as straightforward as that. Certainly you can see an awful lot of activity in the early years, in the 1880s. This is a new idea, it's catching on. It's not as straightforward as that, though. You had an awful lot of infighting, there was a lot of vitriol, there was a lot of bickering about the administrative aspects of the GAA as well, because you've got to try and pin this down. There's a very strong emphasis on rules and codification and administrative efficiency and administrative consistency from the very early stages as well. And as with any sporting organisation, you can't achieve that without a fair degree of infighting.
Cusack was born to serve on a one-man committee. He's an extraordinary man, brilliant visionary, extremely intelligent. But Michael Cusack seemed unable to avoid conflict in everything he did. He managed to fall out with practically everyone within the GAA who he came in contact with, but he also fell out in extraordinary way with his opponents.
Parsa an chasta no is daar een heren, agus dyna dachyd agus mar ddiaha cantalach yn awn ffein ba Michal Cusack. Mar o'ch ein i fach yn GAA awn, ac ar no nid fach sial an y garidige yn y effig o'ch sinsiarach. Ni'r waed y rheb sy'n marwni ac fi mi, agus dibriage, mar jawl yr aspa effachta agus aspa agor y gwrsi rirchain, agus jawl ystocha gwrsi parsa dy choma. Ach ni'r let sy'n agriacht, agus bhí sé bainteach leis an eagraíocht go dtí lá a bháis, ní dhéann sé éoníocht an eagraíocht a scoilt nó a leit.
Bhí sé lá sa teachtain éibre in éiring. Bhí an dánach an taon lá séir a bhí acu. Bhí coscar chluichí sacr agus rugby ar an nánach. Le seo an aigne, chur cumann luachlas gael formhór a gluichí ar siúl ar an nánach. Ach bhí takeíocht na haglaise the year.
One of the problems which emerged about Sunday play was the fact that certain clerics were worried that if people began travelling long distances to match on Sundays, that GAA players would stop going to Mass. So one of the things they did was, at a reasonably early stage, it was decided that no match should take place before 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon to allow people, as they said, to assist at Mass and then to go on to whatever match they were playing in.
At the meeting in Thurles in 1884, a master move was taken when it was decided to invite Dr. Croke, Davitt and Parnell to be patrons. Here were 3 men respected throughout Ireland, 3 men of very different character and outlook, but 3 men who gave a tremendous impetus to the GAA at its infancy.
Nuair a bhanig an císógach agriocht a chuirich ahantas gaelach an cín agus a cheirthach mianta na Bretaine, dagach sé cumann luachlas gael an iscí suite. Leis an tionach ar a bhéige ar ógan na héireann, thug sé seo áit lárnachta san ainas palatúr. Hir nefspleachaí éireann, náisiún, nó cuid de impeireacht. Bhí na náisiúnig bunreachtúla an airca an grúpa náisiúnig radicacha a bhí takeach an cín, an Irish Republican Brotherhood.
An folíocht an trid cogan talún agus an aglis. So bhí an aglis seo nó hús, agus tá nó bhíidir in lec leis an IRB chun sais an láb an uachtar dáil ar an cumann. Agus beléad treis cúpla bliain go raibh an cumann nua seo anna hácht agus saoil na tíre, agus gur lúp for an dúis sé graime áil ar an cumann. So bhí cólinn cóchta ann idir an aglis agus náisiúnachas agus mar sin de.
So there was a sense of a new generation beginning to take over the reins of the IRB, and they do look to infiltrate organisations like the GAA and like the Gaelic League as well. And that was very obviously fertile ground for them to try and build their influence. So they did use these organisations as cover, but there was also, of course, the natural affiliation that these people would have made with the Gaelic Athletic Association, because culturally it represented many of the political aims that the IRB was committed to. So inevitably there was going to be a connection between them. The problem for the GAA, of course, is trying to control the extent to which the politicians or the revolutionaries are trying to dominate and infiltrate their ranks.
There were incredibly difficult days for the association in the early days. T.F. O'Sullivan, writing on those days, said, "The association had to contend not only with opposition from without, but worse still, with bungling and treachery from within.
Bhí a chugad carga féin ag cumann lúchlas Gael ina chéad ceithre bliain. Bhí gach ite de héal politiúil na tíre gafa leis. Ba vinnicí a bhí cuasaí políochta a nuachtar agrú na gluichí féin. Roedd an aglis, an IRB agus náisiúnathe eile san canas na hagriachta. Be duine de bhanathirí an chumann davan a chroigh glanúnachas. Ach be bheag nar bhíle bhíon dus na cluichí an agriocht.
1888, they sent 40 athletes and hurlers to America. A massive undertaking in those days, very ambitious, but was indicative of the aspirations they had for the Gaelic Athletic Association. The trip itself was a success where the games were concerned, a disaster financially, and it left the association bankrupt.
Ní hamháin gur thubist airgeadais a bhean American invasion don goman, ach an nuas seo, níor éil os cún leathóib siúd a chuigirí san Stát Aontaithe. Bíonn deire chomá le cuidas na canasathe ba hábhachtaí.
Maurice Davan last official act as a member of the Gaelic Athletic Association was at an annual convention in early 1889. He was still president of the association, and he was at the top table trying to put together a system for the organisation of its clubs and the reshaping of its finances, because the GAA was struggling to organise a kind of a central control of its body. He was defeated by the IRB, who controlled the room, and he picked up his papers and he walked out of the room.
In 1888 werd an cumann craobh ile éireann a reachtáil gach bliain. Bhuaigh dúlas éile ó Hubbardárn bhíleach na Gaillimhe san Amáint. Agus sa fel, bhuaigh commercial zimní gún dealgan. Níor ghlacha gan hidéangraf de bhuaiteoirí 1888, ná níor brunag a muoinethe grí néide go dé. Achans na blianta luathe sin is i léige chuig na comórtaisí. Idir 1890 agus 1894, fágad ceithre chraobh ile éireann gan críochnú, diasca slúite a barc nó imirt gharabh. Hit an cumann ó dhéirchéim amháin díreach isteach a gceann eile, nar a scoilt an Pártaí Náisiúnach a Westminster mar gheallar chúrsaí fearnell.
Ba bheag tréimhse an nuas dar na hÉireann, le breis céad bliain an nuas a bhí chográna, leis a tréimhse ag tús na nóchadaí, héis colscara chunspóid agus sa deire hir hail túrnamh agus bás fearnell. Scoilt glúiseachtaí náisiúnta, bhí cuidiú nimh a dobar na carnachta diad fárá sa phobal náisiúnach a gaiitina, agus níor tháinig an GAA sláán uig san.
Bhí cumann lúchleas Gael tre seasamh le Parnell don go is mó. Tre se bháis aban bhí an cumann ina chiarthúil dar bhór na 1890. In 1892 níor chuireach 3 chunta isteach ar chraobh na mána.
By 1898, the GAA was almost dead. Several of the prominent people suggested that they wind it up, actually.
You might say, how did it survive? One answer is, it was a kind of a miracle. That's one answer. The other is, the GAA gave the people a freedom that they didn't have. A freedom to be athletes and to have a club that would accept them. A freedom to play our games. But there was more than that at the helm. You had men there who were driven by what I would call a missionary zeal. And with that, you couldn't fail.
Bhí deire an chéad sriste ag an gomann, gunta ach sláán. Ach an ghanas dó, bhí sé túirt aig I ríist ar cheandas na tréimhsí ba hiblódí is stair na hÉireann.